My name is Amirah. I'm from Rajsurian Malaysia, or known as Suaram. I am your moderator for today's webinar session. So this webinar is live on Aliran's Facebook page. Perhaps our viewer for today can share this webinar on your personal Facebook account so that our webinar can reach to more audience. So before I begin, I want to share a bit about People's Agenda. Basically, People's Agenda is mobilized by 6 organizations as the main leaders, which are Aliran, Gerak, Pakus, Save Rivers, Suaram, and Undi 18. And until today, the People's Agenda is supported by 57 civil society organizations. The main core of the People's Agenda includes several important aspects in civil society's efforts to continuously highlight their demands, especially towards the 15th general election. So we outline 5 key points in this People's Agenda. The first one is uphold the dignity and quality of life of the people. And the second, to promote equitable, sustainable development and address the climate crisis. And the third one is celebrate diversity and inclusivity. And the fourth one is save democracy and uphold the rule of law. And the fifth one is fight corruption and cronyism. So previously, we organized several webinars related to each key points mentioned. So all of you can take a look on Aliran's website and Facebook page for the previous webinar. So today's webinar, we will discuss on the save democracy and uphold the rule of law. And without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for today. So we have YB Nurul, Izzah, Anwar with us today. Hi YB. So YB Izzah is a member of Parliament for Permatang Pauh. She has served as a member of the Dewan Rakyat for 3 terms since 2008. She also a member of the Public Account Committee. At the Keadilan level, she was elected as the party's vice president and the spokesperson for the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. So in line with her concern for prisoners, she is also active in All Parliamentary Group Malaysia, APPGM, for prison reform and places of detention. And also we have with us is Prof Wong Chin Huat.
Hi, good evening.
All right. Hi, Prof. Prof Chin Huat is a political scientist at Sunway University. His research interest lies in electoral system, party system, and parliamentary democracy. He believes politicians can be men's and women's best friend if they are well trained. Next, we have with us Madam Rani Rasiah. Madam Rani is a social activist involved in the struggles of plantation workers and urban pioneers for over 20 years, currently working with contract workers in government departments and lorry drivers. Rani also a founder member of PSM and currently a central committee member and head of the migrant desk. Hi, Rani. Okay, last but not least, we have with us is Mr. Rajsurian Pillai. Mr. Raj is a criminal law practitioner and a sole proprietor of Mr. Surian. Hi, Raj.
Hi, evening.
Right. Okay, so I guess I briefly give a bit of background of our speakers for today, and let's start with the first round. Perhaps I can ask Raj first. So Raj, as a lawyer, having helped out at some recent protests, and how do you see and what are your thoughts on the space for civil and political rights in the country today? Are we progressing or regressing on human rights in general? Perhaps you can highlight some issues that need to be erased.
Okay, we have to look at it in the context of perhaps over the last decade. I think most popularly was, many of us can remember back the first Bersih, how there was such a large gathering of people and we were told that, you know, ini adalah bukan budaya kita, ini protest gathering semua budaya barat. And equally, the reaction to the protest was by the authorities was particularly harsh by today's standards, right? You know, there was water cannon, there was mass arrests. In fact, if you look at all the videos that were posted, there was even violence used by the authorities in order to make everyone accord to whatever their orders are. However, things have progressed over time. Bersih 1, Bersih 2, and multiple other protests which have happened since then. Authorities seem to have toned down over the last several years. Over the last several years, what I see is the police no longer arrest people on the spot. No longer are there water cannons and tear gas being thrown at people who march peacefully, right? The police nowadays perform more of a, they are there and they take care and they watch what's happening. Only when people cross the line and arrest is really necessary that they proceed then to arrest or use whatever physical means as necessary. Over the past few years, there has not been any arrest. Police merely had called in several of the protesters that they have identified for statement. This includes multiple MPs protests in the Dataran area, multiple other protests and gatherings in Padang Merbok, near Sogo, as well as marches. The Peaceful Assembly Act, there was no one charged in the last few years as far as I can remember. However, very recently, in the last approximately, I think 2 to 3 weeks, there are already 4 people charged under the Peaceful Assembly Act for not providing sufficient notice under the PAA, which currently stands at 5 days notice to the police before organizing an assembly. So prior to this, because there were conflicting cases at the Court of Appeal. One says that there's no need to give notice. The other says that it's the law under PAA, Peaceful Assembly Act, that you need to give, and therefore you need to give. There were no charges for a very long time, but until very recently, 4 people were charged. Perhaps this is a sign that election is coming. And you know, when election is nearing, hot topics are always wielded like a sword, you know, race, religion, politics. So there is, to a certain extent, further clamp down on any criticism, be it valid or not. So, you know, some people might think, you know, such criticisms are valid. However, certain parties, perhaps more sensitive, they view it as something untouchable, especially these 3 topics. So the other one that has been used quite regularly is the Communication and Multimedia Act, Section 233. Which reads improper use of network facilities. So basically, as long as something is posted online, some online means social media, WhatsApp, Twitter, and all that. Nowadays, TikTok. The police, the authorities have gone and used Section 233 in order to charge them in court. So some might see this as silencing voices of dissent, as clamping down on freedom of speech. So some see this as perhaps something acceptable in order to keep the country peaceful. Yeah, so that's how I view it and my observations.
All right, thank you so much, Raj. And I believe your experience in dealing with this banyak kali turun IPD dan wangi so basically, yeah. So my next question to Rani. So as part of a political party, Rani, do you think that there has been sufficient acknowledgement of human rights, especially social economic rights? What has been PSM's role in raising the issues of civil, political, and socio-economic rights?
Thank you, Amirah. Okay, I think in the few decades just after independence, the government seemed to have a social democratic element to the governance, and I think we found that there were there were many services, many social amenities that were extended to the people, that were developed in an inclusive kind of way, and made available to as much as the population as possible. But the role of government, the notion of government, changed drastically with this neoliberal policy, neoliberal philosophy. And the change was drastic. We saw and continue to see the erosion of rights, and government abandoning responsibility over many what we see is obligations to the people in a democracy. And that one, I'd like to use one example to illustrate this. In the 70s, when Malaysia started industrializing, there was a big movement of people from rural areas to the towns to work in the factories that were opening up. There was insufficient housing or insufficient affordable housing, and people were allowed by the government to build their own houses, wooden houses, on unused government land. Later on, they began to be dismissed as squatters, illegal, and so on. But to even these now so-called illegal squatters, the government of that day extended public amenities like water, electricity, and even telephone. Okay? But if you take the period after that in the 90s, even the land they were squatting on, even the land they were sitting on, was sold by the government to developers, the private developers. Okay, and there was massive eviction, demolition of homes, and so on. And all this in an environment where there was not enough housing for the poor, housing for the low income, where housing was still housing was not cheap, and the government left the building of low-cost housing in the hands of the private sector, and there was no adjustment of wages, no increase in wages to meet the rising cost of houses and to enable people to own a home. So that is, for me, that is like cuts across all provision of social amenities. You know, it's seen in every aspect, every area. And along with that, with this new thinking, we had privatization of basic needs, privatization of basic amenities, such that only those who could afford this, only those who could pay, could avail of such services. So that's an erosion in, and also where private healthcare, for example, was allowed to prosper, public healthcare began to suffer. Okay, and also pro-business government. Pro-business government, it meant that the government was business friendly, and a lot of policies that protected workers, for example. Our labor laws were stronger then, but we now have a series of amendments that has eroded the rights of workers. And protection for workers has weakened. There's casualization of labor, to which has resulted in a situation where workers are not protected. They can be hired and fired without notice, and so on. There is little job security, which we saw during the pandemic. You know how vulnerable this layer of people were, and how their wages, for example, didn't enable any kind of saving for a so-called rainy day. I think it demonstrated that our V40, much of our V40, can't last without, can't live a normal life with the basic needs without an income. And that income, that monthly income, is not stable. If a crisis hits, they can become homeless. They need food packets, and so on. And apart from that, things like the 12-hour workday, which I think all of us know the importance of family time, importance of recreation, importance of rest. When people work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, there are some areas like schools or like security guards, for example, who are required to work 12 hours a day without a break, with no break at all. So that's hardly recognition of any kind of rights, and that's a large portion of our population. And okay, the other thing is that what we see is that there should be greater implementation of laws, especially those not many laws that protect people. There should be more of that. But what we see is that implementation is very weak. I think allocation, money spent on implementing policies by the government is very weak, and people are unable to to enjoy the rights afforded by any kind of law that's supposed to protect them. Okay, so I go on to my second part of it. Our role in raising the issues of civil, political, and social economic rights. Okay, people who know PSM will know that a major part of our work is actually highlighting socio-economic issues affecting about 70% of our population. For example, we work for old age pension, universal old age pension, affordable housing, free education, quality public health care, and also we have campaigned for local council elections. How do we do this? We have a three-pronged kind of approach. One is we educate people. We try to create awareness among people of these rights. We try to organize people who are affected and demand their rights. And we do national, this is done through national campaigns and pamphleteering and talks and social media campaigns. The other action we often do is we lobby government. We come up with policies. We draft policy where we find that existing policies are lacking, and we submit policy proposals to government. We try to have meetings and engage with them, and also we do demonstrations when the need arises. Okay, apart from that, we also try to lobby Parliament to come up with laws to protect, for example, farmers. Where recently, there's a lot of eviction of farmers producing food for the country, and loopholes in the law have been used to evict these farmers, to sell the land, and so on. Yeah, so I think what I can say is that PSM is a small party, but I think we've been quite loud on these areas. Thank you.
Right. I really like it when you highlight not just the law, but also on the implementation of the law itself. There is somehow that government somehow it's like not really progressively doing it. Also, okay, let's thank you so much, Rani, for your answer. And can we move to Prof Chin Huat? So Prof, what are your thoughts on the present status and progress of reforms to promote good governance and human rights in Malaysia?
Thank you, Amirah.
Yeah.
If we look at what happened on 23rd August when we had the first ex-prime minister sent to jail for corruptions, that's a very important message. What they say is that people are equal before the law. Now, a lot of people looking at that would praise the 9 judges from High Court, Court of Appeal to the Federal Court. But they've probably forgotten that this case wouldn't happen if the Attorney General chambers decided to withdraw the case at any point in time.
Mhm.
And so when we think about rule of law, we must remember you need more than just good judges. The issue we are talking about here is selective prosecution, or I would argue more accurately, selective impunity. Why? Because when you have a case of purely just selective prosecution, you may still get justice done in the sense that you get let off if you're not supposed to be found guilty when you have good judges. But if you have selective impunity, meaning that the case gets dropped before you, then there's nothing good judges can do. I'll give you an example. Just in August, that we have this former chief spy of Malaysia, Haziqah Abdul Hamid. She was originally charged for criminal breach of trust involving a whopping amount of 50.4 million ringgit. When the case started its trial in 2020, after a year, the prosecution decided to withdraw the existing charges, not letting her off yet, and grant her what legally known as DNAA, discharge not amounting to acquittal, meaning that the prosecution may come back and charge her again. So she was not let free immediately. But after more than a year, the prosecution did not pursue with other judges. So the accused went to court and say, I should be let free. And of course, the judge would say, yes, you need to go. We need to let you go because that the prosecution cannot, let your life hang in the air and indefinitely. Now that's one case that how this could happen. And you want to compare, like someone can walk away when they are charged of stealing 50.4 million. Just look at another case about a month before. That was, I think in Terengganu, you have a housewife. She was sentenced to 14 months in jail for stealing 2 packets of Milo worth 73 ringgit. Now, there's issue about how can we actually have more reasonable, proportional sentence. That's another issue, what we need perhaps a sentencing board. But here, what I want to press is that how can you let someone with 50.4 million walk away? In this case, it's clearly there's 2 darjat here. That one darjat, one class, 2 society of 2 classes. One class, the Milo stealer as poor people. Then on the other part, this accused in the CBT case was a top government officer. But there's another divider between the 2 classes because not everyone among the political elite or bureaucratic elite would get away. So how would the second divider operate? It comes down to say, on which sides of politics that you are in, the political divide. So if you happen to be in government side, then you tend to get away. And we have example in the past, and then even after 2018, we have the acquittal of Lim Kuan Yew, and followed by later former Sabah Chief Minister Musa Aman, then Ahmad Maslan, former Deputy Minister, and former Adun of Sabah, Peter Anthony, and so on. You have all these cases besides Haziqah Abdul Hamid. If you happen to be on the government side, you stand a chance to walk away. Now, I'm not saying that all the cases that were dropped by the prosecution has no merit. You might need to look into each of them to decide whether they deserve to be let off. But the question here, justice cannot be just done. It has to be seen to be done. So when you have the prosecution, our public prosecutor is also the Attorney General, the lawyer of the government. it is all right for Prime Minister to choose his or her own people to be his legal counsel. So if our Attorney General only play the role as legal counsel to the government, to the Prime Minister, it's perfectly all fine for you to pick orang dia. But when the Attorney General, the Peguam Negara, is also the public prosecutor, how do you make sure that this orang dia would not let off all the orang-orang Perdana Menteri? That's the issue we are facing. And what's the implication? The implication we have is that if we do not separate the two roles, the Attorney General and the public prosecutor, we will not have political stability. Why? Because whichever government, coalition, party or coalitions are in power, there would always be some court cluster. And you should not think that only UMNO has court cluster. So any parties in government, there will be always some court cluster trying to say, can we get a new Attorney General in place? By getting a new government in place so that we can have our case dropped. So ultimately, we will, if we allow this to continue, we will end up in a society of two classes of criminal, dua darjat. One class of criminals who are so politically powerful that they can change the government and appoint a new Attorney General to let them walk free. And the second class of criminals, ordinary criminals who can only appoint ordinary lawyers. Now, that would be completely making our rule of law, our judiciary as into a mockery. And we need to end this. If we don't, there's no meaning for our independence, because ultimately, during colonial time, you have dua darjat, the colonial master and the colonized. If we allow the dua darjat society to continue, we are basically restoring colonializations, except the colonial masters come from amongst ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Right. So, all right. I would like to ask YB Izzah. So, YB, in what way did the 22 months of PH rule contribute to better governance and human rights in Malaysia today? And perhaps you can share with us what specific reforms have you as an MP been pushing in the parliament or in your constituency in promoting good governance and human rights in Malaysia?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam hormat, terima kasih Amirah dan para panelis. Saya mohon maaf kerana jam 11.30 saya harus pergi untuk menghadiri program lain. Maka insyaAllah I'll try to answer the question that you asked. From the perspective of backbencher MP then, in the 22 months that Pakatan Harapan was in power. I think to place it in context, Alhamdulillah, most of the points have been raised by the respective speakers. Rani specifically mentioned the weaknesses when we are somehow stuck in the current mainstream acceptance of how things are supposed to be done. So similarly for Malaysia, our democratic system is, of course, first past the post, and it does bring into for some of the challenges. Now, despite all of this, I believe the biggest success was really the Rakyat success, because you saw the change in government took place or take place in the fateful year of 2018. And this is important because it changes and it's allowed us to cross the psychological Rubicon. Now, from the backbenchers' perspective, we also shared a lot of aspirations. We had prepared much suggestions, which not all could have been implemented or introduced. Having said that, the key roles I think I was really interested in was, of course, to make sure that the PAC, our Parliamentary Accounts Committee, was headed by the opposition so we can remain a strong bulwark against the excesses of the executive. Jadi kalau PAC itu dipengerusikan oleh wakil kerajaan, bagaimana boleh kita siasat segala laporan ketua audit yang berkait dengan penyalahgunaan dana oleh kerajaan pusat atau pihak eksekutif. So that role in jawatan kuasa kira-kira wang negara was for me something that was a red line that you had to preserve and protect so that we could always perform it without fear or favor. Yeah. And of course, the other part was the private members' bills. I had prepared 7, alhamdulillah, thanks to CSO, initiatives like yours. And before this, there was a group called Lawyer Buruk, not Lawyer Buruk technically, but a group of lawyers who actually collaborated with me, and I came up with a private member bill on abolishing the Sedition Act. Under PH specifically, it was the Suruhanjaya, ya, undang-undang untuk menubuhkan Suruhanjaya TVET dan latihan industri. So it takes away the capitalistic structure whereby ministers control TVET structures or TVET institutions, and the power dynamics is balanced. So the commission then controls every ministry. So every other TVET related program will be governed, will be judged based on the quality. But you know, again, there were delays, but I would say it was pivotal because it brought into the psyche of many a few things. Federal government changed, PAC has to be independent. There was social protection in the guise of ISURI and other related understanding of the importance of pushing forward and improving the rights of workers. I would say even the eventual passing of the anti-sexual harassment bill, the social welfare wasn't brought up by the current government. But the issue is, it's really important to understand how this helps issues being brought forward, right? Because there's contestation. Now, I'm sure, we can look at the litany of legal reforms under PH. My personal favorite as a backbencher, and, not everything we agreed with the current government. It was good in a way because we provided a lot of criticism internally, sometimes spill over externally. But my proudest moment was also the eventual passing of the anti-hopping bill. It's not perfect. We're always trying to find the balance between voting based on your conscience and the power that a party wields. But it's really important to get an understanding that you will be punished for crossing, in pursuit of other perks or whatever that's related. So we also see in terms of equal MP allocation. Why do I say this is important? I remember mantan ahli parlimen Dr. Jayakumar membawa ke mahkamah case where we challenged why was it the right of the Prime Minister to disburse ICU funds, implementation coordination unit under the Prime Minister's department. So it's like MPs can't access that particular funding at the time. We lost the case, but I always remember, like, at least now, because the issue became talk about, people were saying, well, firstly, the rakyat deserves to know where our allocation is going. And MPs are supposed to be not just the disbursing. I mean, some people will question it should be going directly to the organizations. But the point is, at least you equalize the spending field, satu. And secondly, you must be audited. So every single cent that's being disbursed has to be audited. So it equalizes when every member of parliament gets the access to the allocation. And of course, at the height of the pandemic, you see the weaknesses of the government agencies in disbursing social welfare aid. Kebanyakannya menggunakan data yang kami kumpul menerusi senarai pekerja keluarga yang datang untuk meminta bantuan daripada pejabat kami. And I think the other reforms, and again, history or the arc of history has to be seen in a continuum. So I think Pakatan is there, but it's like, it's about you're planting the seeds. I would say one of the most pivotal moments for me when you talk about separation of the judiciary, and this goes back to Chin Huat's point, was when the International Commission of Jurists were observing most of the cases taking place in Malaysia, and that was the year 1999. They condemn, of course, political intervention in the cases of the late Irene Fernandez, Anwar Ibrahim and Lim Guan Eng. But then you saw the formation of the Judicial Appointments Commission. Yeah, and I'd like to actually quote Professor Shad Salim Faruqi here, because it was important that he stated, the future recommendations, you do need to understand that these threats against judicial independence, it will continue to come from private centers of power, from the executive organs of the state. So you need to make sure it's a continuous process. And that's why we're very worried, not just what Chin Huat raised, the fact that it's not separate. The head of the Peguam Negara advisor, to the Prime Minister, also the Chief Public Prosecutor. So the same person has the power, right, to withhold, to drop, to prosecute. And the other problem again, the Prime Minister also chooses who sits on the Judicial Appointments Commission. And if he has, yes men, and Keadilan MPs have just issued a statement to this regard, then you will have perhaps lesser than independent justices. I would add on the other bit of reform is the creation of a lot of parliamentary select committees. And again, speaking from context, from my own experience, I was really happy to be part of the APPJM, all-party parliamentary group on prison reform and places of detention. We had one on SDGs, So the Sustainable Development Goals also helps cajole many constituencies to be more aware. Although again, the proof of the pudding is in the doing. So kadang-kadang banyaklah agenda yang kita tangani bersama, tapi kita jarang nak laksana. I was also, the last point, and again, I'm touching base on my own personal experience. The list itself officially can be seen on records and on news coverages. But I like the fact that the communique aspect of when YB Kula was Minister of Human Resources, that stakeholder engagement, diteruskan. Maksudnya, if you want to introduce minimum wage, yes, there were some quarters who criticized. And this is again before the pandemic. Why did you not introduce and implement 1,500 immediately? And I completely agree. I think workers in Malaysia are badly treated. Our laws, even the reforms that was pronounced by Dr. Suaram, and it's like really, really archaic. And we have received criticisms from countries like Indonesia, right, to just showcase how bad things are, even for those who are legalized, not even touching those in the informal sector, not even touching those who are unregistered. But I would say that stakeholder engagement thrives, the tripartite engagement with MTUC, with the ministry. These things matter, because at the end of the day, governments, first, they don't know everything. And even if they do know, they need to make sure that communication with different stakeholders, CSOs, continue. So then people understand, okay, where are you here? If you're introducing in a gradual manner, why? And I think that helps move things along. I would just also add, in terms of moving for the future, my biggest concern really is on the dearth of trust in politicians in general, because that will lead to apathy, and that will lead to the fact that only loyal members of political parties will go out in droves to vote. So I quoted Malaysia Kini data looking at the numbers of voters coming from the segment of below 35 versus above 60. So again, the numbers are staggeringly different, but it goes back to the reform that Pakatan also introduced, which is the Undi 18, meaning 18-year-olds can come out to vote. So, these are, the challenge is always, how do you prioritize? And how do you do that not knowing that you only had 22 months. It's tough. So even managing success or governance, I think we, whether we're in the opposition or government, state or federal, would need that level of political nous to know which of the reforms that you prioritize first. Yeah, like I always focus on food security, but because I assume that you know, an independent judiciary, separation of powers between the three branches is a given. Of course, how can Malaysia democracy proceed without these things in place? But then I realized when I do prepare my own private members' bills, when I do have sessions in parliament, I realize how fragile everything is because power is concentrated on the hands of the prime minister. So unless you stranglehold the prime minister a little bit, whoever he or she may be, then you have this over-centralization that allows for a lot of manipulation and subordination. And perhaps it's, you know, it's a legacy of our colonizers. I completely accept that, but it doesn't mean we can't change. So sometimes pushing the envelope is very important. And I think that's what Pakatan had done very well. But of course, we also need to understand, as we shift our priorities, we need to look at things differently after the pandemic. I don't think we have. Suddenly, we're still back to normal. What's normal, really? So I think I like what Rani raised, because even the discussion, how do we bring it in a post-pandemic reality that you shake up everybody, you shake up the opposition, you shake up the government, that they're competing. Yeah, the Arabic term is fastabiqul khairat. So they're competing, pushing one another to basically not to offer populist policies, because I think populist policies have very erroneous outcomes, very dangerous outcomes. You do need to have like social protection floor that is encompassing across the different segments, and you do need to implement things based on evidence. So whether through pilots or whether through other sort of practices and experimentation, it's important to have in mind the target audience. And people don't think of this enough because people think about electoral cycles. So for me, that's a great success, right? The fact that you allow people to cross the psychological Rubicon. And that's a good start, and that's a win in itself. But we need more politicians maybe to think about this. Like Raj raised the fact that people, well, kind of make me miss the water cannon days, not for the right reasons. But the point is, yeah, things have improved, but it doesn't mean that it will not happen again, right? It just means that we have more populist kleptocrats or populist autocrats who know how to be benevolent, who know how to disburse the funds for civil servants, for whoever they deem deserving at the time. But you can't run away from the fact that that power actually has to be taken away completely to make sure a system that works for the people for the long run, not just the short run. I just want to add last part, which is the reprioritization of TVET. I think that that's one thing that perhaps Mazli could have done if it were given the space and breadth to do so, because I don't see the political will being enacted by the current government, especially when the pandemic saw the closures of TVET institutions. So if you look at UN EVOC, the United Nations body tracking the TVET or technical programs across the countries, Malaysia really didn't fully utilize, when we know our segment of workers come from the TVET generation, whether in school or whether in the workforce. So it's knowing your priorities, and I feel that my end point is, as we look at how democracy, how the rule of law can thrive, it really depends on how relevant laws that you introduce, whether the force majeure, which was introduced 7 months after the pandemic hit, right? So we did it 7 months di langkah-langkah mengatasi COVID, contohnya langkah-langkah sementara COVID, and it doesn't help people who have been evicted. So again, how do you show that democracy actually impacts people's lives on the ground? That it helped me to save my money, that it helped me to be able to protect myself against my company, my e-hailing company. So spelling that out is really important, so people know, okay, I do want to defend the rule of law. I do want to defend the rights of members of parliament to bring laws to parliament, because if you depend on the current government, every government will be quite lulled into a sense, I have to maintain my power base for the next elections, right? But you want to change that, and that can be done if you open up reforms, including those given to backbencher MPs and independent or opposition MPs. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Baby. Perhaps I can just continue to the second round, maybe why we can answer this question. So in the upcoming GE15, what are the key issues on democracy and the rule of law that PKR will be promoting?
Yeah, so, for me, I said earlier, I alluded to it, first was the statement made by Keadilan. We're very committed to making sure that the Judicial Appointments Commission is protected, that you have people of independent and credible know how to lead and in the choosing of judges. I remember South Korea back in the day where they had a huge movement. They exposed the actual, how much every judge had, if there was any controversy involving another. It's really to that level. And I think Malaysians have to understand that with power, even in the judiciary or in the PAC, there's accountability, and of course you then have to protect judges who have been independent and professional. So I think that that's a pivotal part. We also look at how we can ensure that the tenets in the democratic system or governance can help change people's lives for the better. I mentioned, Ayuh Malaysia carries a few, but I think for me, I can speak for me because my most meaningful moment was when I had the opportunity to kind of measure how COVID had affected people in the lower income segment. We always talk about how do we utilize democracy to benefit people's lives? Well, we haven't even used the latest measurement by democratic and developed nations in order to see how deprived our people actually are. So for me, Keadilan's really committed to making sure multi-dimensionally, how can people's lives be better through democratic change or improvement. I had the rare pleasure to work with Professor Fatimah Kari, but I think Malaysia, in terms of implementation and programs, I hope that Selangor can do far more, including Penang, whether we kind of try to utilize and feed to avoid intergenerational poverty and trauma across the different B40, M40 families, because we haven't understood the actual impact of COVID, which will be with us for the next decade or even more. So for Keadilan, it's very going back to the main tenets of social justice, but also looking at it on how we can better preserve and more environmentally sustainable and sound Malaysia. I don't think we've even scratched the surface, even we talk about climate. We know about the weather patterns today, but the focus again is always led by the capitalists. And I go back to Rani's point, because you talk about the climate change, but no one talks about how do you protect the bottom 40 households from the huge adverse changes in terms of rainfall, in terms of heat stress. All they talk about is carbon sequestration, right? All these big high technology, extremely expensive projects, which will not necessarily benefit Malaysia, especially as we are only responsible for 0.4% of emissions compared to the top 6, the global 6. So again, I don't understand why we cannot match these things. For me, this is my democratic right. This is our democratic right. So it's really Keadilan's kind of overall pursuit to make sure social justice is reflected through these reforms. For me personally, 7 bills, undang-undang dah siap. tunggu nak bahas kat parlimen pun tak boleh. But I really feel that, you know, kita kena sediakan payung sebelum hujan. So if Habibie can do it in a matter of months, so we need to get our bills ready. Yeah, because then you sort of, okay, you want to tweak it, you can tweak it, you can have a select committee. But undang-undang ini adalah tunjang kepada kenegaraan, and then you need to review everything you do. Review, implementation, because our problem is a culture of maintenance and a culture of review. So I would say this. I really hope look forward for us to do things in a different manner, and look forward for, you know, the gabungan untuk save democracy and uphold the rule of law. Perhaps beginning with protecting our judges will gain sway, because your words should matter more than the politicians. I'm so sorry, I gotta go. I really am.
But we have like 2 questions for you. Maybe perhaps you can answer briefly. Right. So the first question is from Henry Low. Are there any serious moves to ensure selective impunity is minimized or eliminated by ensuring the AG is not the public prosecutor?
Ya, saya rasa langkah pertama adalah memelihara keanggotaan JAC. Kita ada jangka masa pendek, jangka masa panjang. Ya, jangka masa panjang kita faham keberadaan dan kewujudan seorang peguam negara haruslah dipisahkan daripada pendakwa raya, because the two are different. Dan saya bimbang sangat-sangat, because if we don't protect this, I don't know how much we can protect the eventual judges or the level of influence, right? It's like a dynamic process that's taking place. And more voices and criticism has to be raised in this regard, because we do know the 3 personalities. We have read what they have said. We do know of their record, and they will not be in favor of independent judiciary. So, and I'm a firm believer. It's great we have a former prime minister, because everybody should be scared actually of the judiciary. And everybody should also understand you are given the space to bring it up, whether United Nations working group on arbitrary detention, Raj could correct me in this, International Commission of Jurists. So there are mechanisms, of course, but of course internally, domestically, this has to be done. So please help us, because you got to put a stop to this. I mean, whether it's UMNO, whether it's any party, as Chin Huat mentioned, you cannot touch our judiciary. I mean, it's really important so that no one can feel fearful or scared. And everyone should be really focused on the fact that we're doing our jobs, and you take money as someone who's in office, you're going to pay for it. Next.
Yeah, and one last question. So in the event, it is status quo after the next GE, which keadilan still as opposition, what do you see your role and keadilan's approach will be?
I mean, I'm here for the long run, you know. It's a mission. It's really nice when you know it's a mission. It's never about you. I mean, I think people need to understand, you know, it's the off quote by Martin Luther King, right? It's going to be a long time. I think I referred not just the arc of history, best to justice. I think I referred more to the romance of the 3 kingdoms, because it took 60 years, and it's good. So for me, you know, alhamdulillah, dapat jadi ahli parlimen pun, it's a great honor. And I think we have to understand, whether we are ahli majlis, ketua kampung, atau aktivis, cikgu, ibu, it's a great honor. We do what we can. We contribute. We speak up. And certainly politicians can't do their job if the other stakeholders don't support the ecosystem or fight back when power is abused. So I think keadilan, you know, it's important, because we started out as a multiracial party. We wanted to implement it at every level. We chose it when it was really not sexy. 1999, it was very difficult. I think the other bit is also to make sure that we future-proof the party by having kind of impactful policies. You know, I know Ayuh Malaysia, some people say, yes, it's really policy heavy, it's not populist enough. Tapi atas dasar kita nak cuba menunjukkan kadang-kala dasar pelaksanaan program yang memberi kesan kepada rakyat is more important and should be put forward for feedback, for criticism, right? So the government of the day, you know, if, of course, insyaAllah, kalau kita diberikan peluang, we would honor it and appreciate it. But kalau tidak, we push to the hilt And if I say this, nanti keluarlah Nurul Izzah tak percaya kita boleh menang. I mean, for me, inshallah, any position, it's great for us to contribute, but we must not allow for certain transgressions to continue.
Alright. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time. And I understand you have a tight schedule today. Right. Thank you so much for together with us. Alright, so I guess bye-bye. I guess we move to the second round to our speakers. Perhaps I can come back to Raj. So Raj, so in the upcoming GE15, what are some political reforms people, especially the young people, the youth, should ask of the candidates?
Okay, because I'm a lawyer, I'm going to particularly concentrate on law lah. And my fellow speakers perhaps can add on to the list. It's more of a wish list, and I think it was the same wish list that many of us had in 2018. Among others, getting rid of the Sedition Act, Akta Hasutan 1948. I think this one needs to go lah. This act is a 1948 act used by the British government back then to silence people who stood up against them. Previously, the Sedition Act was used for criticism against government, against the Prime Minister. After much criticism from society, they have reduced its usage, but they still tend to use it for any criticisms against race, royalty, or religion. I think this one definitely should go. We have other more suitable laws under the Penal Code which can be used. The Public Assembly Act, the need to give notice. I think to assemble is basic human rights. There need not be notice given. If anything, the authorities, the police are the ones that need to tolong jaga keselamatan rather than, menghalang orang untuk berkumpul ataupun untuk berjalan. Okay. Other than that, the two popular acts that I think even Suaram is actively fighting against, SOSMA. In the recent parliament session, SOSMA is back again. POCA, Prevention of Crime Act. Section 233 of the Communication and Multimedia Act. This act, as I mentioned earlier, is wielded against anybody who criticizes or basically bawa, dikenali sebagai akta sakit hati lah. So anybody sakit hati buat report, nanti kena siasat section 233, kena tuduh kat mahkamah. Okay. Apa lagi? IPCMC. IPCMC in simple terms is the Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission. As it stands today, you make a report against a police for any misconduct, orang yang menyiasat kes ni adalah polis sendiri. And that's the very short of it, and you can see how it is deemed to be not proper lah. Mana boleh orang sendiri siasat sendiri kan? Do we expect fairness in such investigations? Alright. Other than that, the death penalty. Definitely, of course, optimistically, we would push it to the furthest end, which is to get rid of the death penalty in whole. But then, of course, there's some pushback, perhaps either lacking of political will, or some people in society still are against the full abolishment of the death penalty. So the alternative to that perhaps is to get rid the mandatoriness of the death penalty. Currently, as it stands, there are certain sections of which, if you are convicted or found guilty of, the judge's hands are tied. They have to give the death penalty as a sentence. There is no option. They have no discretion in the matter. I say give the discretion back to the judges because they are in the best situation, the best place. They have heard the trial. They know what is best. Of course, it's not death penalty or bebas berjalan dekat luar. It's either the death penalty or perhaps something else like penjara seumur hidup 20 tahun, mungkin 30 tahun, depending on the facts. Other than that, I think as rightly pointed out by my fellow panelists, the separation of the AG and the public prosecutor. The speakers have gone into depth as to why we need to separate these two and why they cannot be in the same office. And actually, we have already seen its effects as pointed out by Prof earlier as well. I will not go into that. Other than that, the selection of judges, as we all know, in the past few days, 3 new persons have been elevated into the selection committee, and it's at the choice of the Prime Minister. And as rightly pointed out by YB earlier, you know, the Prime Minister still wields a lot of power when it comes to this. So, you know, you may, there may be the chance of, you know, the Prime Minister elevating people who is in his favor, his or her favor lah. And perhaps finally, but not limited to just the list that I've given, is also to fight for the independence of the judiciary. As you can see how very recently our judiciary has been attacked quite openly by people with political interest in support of a person from political background. You know, you can't do that because, you know, the judge doesn't give a decision in your favor. You attack, go and dig out all kind of history, you take to social media. This is not right. The judiciary needs to be independent. It needs to be free from all these kind of attacks, so they are not put under pressure when deciding cases. This is something very, very important, perhaps not appreciated enough, which is why the Malaysian Bar decided to march for the independence of the judiciary. All right, I will not go further. I will let the others take on and add on to the list. Thank you, Amirah.
Thank you so much, Raj. And also, okay, maybe I can come back to Rani. So same question as I've been asked Nurul, YB Nurul just now. So in the upcoming GE15, what are the key issues on democracy and the rule of law that PSM will be promoting? You muted.
Okay, now?
Better.
Okay. I want to talk about, before I mention what are the issues you're going to raise, I want to talk about what is the philosophy behind these issues, or what are the thoughts behind these issues. I think the main thing is that we believe that there are enough resources and enough wealth in the country for everyone to live with dignity and freedom. Okay, and the wealth, I mean, like we're told that our GDP has grown 30 times in the past 50 years. So if properly distributed, everyone can live, as I said, with dignity. They don't have to, there doesn't have to be hardship among 70% of the population. But we know reality is different. We have a very unequal society, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a small percentage, and economic stress among 70% of the population. Okay, and real hardship among the people. So with these beliefs, one thing we find is that we have to recognize the importance of a social wage, because we can't ask for a raise in wages. The economic system that the country has chosen will not allow a raise in wages, because we're so dependent on foreign investment, which is seeking the lowest wages in the region. So we have to compete with other countries in the region and offer a wage that is competitive. So that is always a rationale that is given. But how about social wage? I think PSM has raised the concept of a social wage for a long time. But I think what we used to have, the subsidies that people used to get, are viewed as handouts, as a walking stick, as something that will weaken people. So we think there should be a shift in people's thinking, a need to understand why we need the social wage. We have an economic system that, as I said, relies on low wages, okay, to function. But the people with low wages are faced with high prices. So don't they need to be compensated to meet rising costs so that they can live decent lives? They can have access to the basic needs to basic amenities. So we think that this should be put forward as a right of all sectors of the population that are supporting this kind of policies or structures that keep the country functioning. For example, a low-wage economy, which is dependent on foreign investment. That is the nature of our economy. Who keeps it running? The mass of workers. So I think it's high time we recognize that these people need to be given a social wage. They need to be given pensions. Public healthcare. There's got to be decent public healthcare, free education, things like that. So, so for the coming elections, some of the things that we will campaign for are based on this belief. Okay, and so we'll ask for subsidized housing, we'll ask for low-cost housing or housing for the poor to be taken out of the market. We'll ask for a 500 ringgit pension for those aged above 65. Okay, because you can see a lot of people, older people, after they retire, they're completely dependent. They keep working until they drop dead, really, in many cases. And they don't have, they have been earning incomes that never gave them a chance to save. And prices are high, cost of living is high. So we've got to compensate them with a pension so that they can lead a dignified life in their old age. And okay. So then I think that kind of thing will at least have, there'll be some meaning because they get to share in the wealth of the country after contributing so much, after sacrificing so much, after having their wages suppressed, and okay. So apart from that, we'll also campaign for food security, because at the moment, only about 4 to 5% of agricultural land is allocated for food production. And we are heavily dependent on imports. So there's got to be more land allocated for food production. There's got to be protection of food producers. With the use of subsidies, since they have a problem because they are governed by free trade rules. And we think that food production areas need to be gazetted and protected. And as far as land use is concerned, we feel that there's too much power in the hands of one person. So, for example, in the Menteri Besar is also the chief of the land, is a chief land expo, chief of the land, head of the land expo. He's the land expo in charge of the land. And apart from that, he or she might also be the head of the state economic development body, which so when the same person is in these three positions, land, who does land go to? In practice, it seems a lot of it has gone to the state economic development body, which then decides what to do with the land, sell it to a developer, use it for purposes other than food production, evicting, resulting in eviction of farmers. So I think, and that is bad for food security. So that is one thing that we will campaign for. And we will suggest that what we need is a board comprising a cross section of people from the government, from the opposition, from CSOs, from farmers themselves. Okay. Of course, we will campaign for increasing healthcare allocation, since we saw the importance of public healthcare institutions during the COVID. And also very important, we feel that more funds have to go into enforcement. Just to give an example, the minimum wage was gazetted. The minimum wage of 2022 was gazetted and meant to be implemented in May of this year. But I dare say that at least 50% of the working population haven't been earning the minimum wage. And they daren't complain about it because workers are in a tough situation. There is so much of unemployment out there, and there's so much of available labor. There's a huge number of undocumented migrant workers. So there's a lot of available labor out there for employers to say take it or leave it. So they are so afraid of being thrown out of their jobs that they will not raise these questions. They will not go to the labor office to make complaints. And it is exactly in a situation like this that we need labor inspection, that we need enforcement. We need the Human Resources Ministry to spend more money on enforcement and send people down to do spot checks. Only then can a law like this minimum wage this order, which is quite for workers it's quite a big jump from 1,200 to 1,500, but many are not able to enjoy it. So there's no use having laws which are not implemented, which left to themselves, workers will not be able to acquire on their own. So we think that is very important. So that's about it. And just want to add that PSM will not use race or religion to get votes.
Thank you so much, Rani. So last question to Prof Chin Huat. So in the upcoming GE15, what are some reforms people should ask of the candidates?
I want to say that we actually need to achieve all those that advocated on social inclusion, advocated by Rani and YB Izzah, on civil political rights by Rajsurian. But we probably need something before the election, and that's political stability. Because the situation now, by going into elections, we probably would end out, very likely we're going to end out in another hung parliament. Hung parliament itself is not a problem, but hung parliament require a different sets of rules of the game. But our system was not designed for that. And that's why you see what happened after Sheraton move. We, for 17 months, were in a political mess. Last 12 months was stable down because you have an MOU between the government and the main opposition, practically creating the most stable government in our history, because this government actually had 94% majority in the House to survive. But this is not an absolute majority to say that the government can do whatever things. The 94% only guarantee that this government will not collapse, but that's actually give us the room for things to change. Now, what happens if you have a new elections and then you have a new government, new prime minister, and everyone go back to say, let's try our luck again? Can we afford this? If we cannot afford instability, we may not have economic growth, and the poor people probably will suffer more. when the economy is down. So what we need is actually an active and a stable political environment for things to change before we call for the election. At least there are 9 things we need to do. Just now we talk about the separations of public prosecutions from the Attorney General Chamber. That's one. That's very important because otherwise our criminal would be separated into two classes. One class of those who can appoint a new Attorney General to free themselves, and those ordinary criminals who can only appoint normal lawyers. And second, very important, is that we need to expand our voting right for people who are out of their region, namely Sarawak, Sabah, Semenanjung. Why? Because they shouldn't be forced to buy air ticket to go home and to apply leave. Practically what you're going to see is that of those people who are left out of their regions, only those who are richer can afford to do so. If you're poor, you have other things more important to do. And now what's the impact of this? It basically means that poor people lose the say in elections. And after we have automatic voter registration, Undi 18, we have seen in the worst scenario in Johor, you have a low turnout at 55%. Now, if the turnout is low, let's say around 55, 60%, and you could have a situation that the government was, whichever government that was formed, maybe like have the support of 35%, 30%. And what does it mean? It means that the government would not be able to carry out any necessary but unpopular policy measure at the time of crisis. And that's bad, because then we probably need any drastic measure. And this is where we're not talking about emergency, we're talking about social economic policies and so on, right? And you probably wouldn't be able to carry it out. Now, what we need another thing is we talk about, we have an ex-prime minister get sent to jail because of one MDB. How do you avoid this? You have to avoid this by not just only regulating political finance, but we need to pay political parties. Why? Because if they're not clean, you pay them to be less corrupt. But for parties like PSF, you need to pay them so that they actually have more money to run and do a better job. And so that's something we need to push it in. And related to that, I think just now, Nurul Izzah talked about this funding for constituency allocations. We now, the 94% of MP in the government that giving full or conditional support to the Prime Minister, they all get the same funding. But there's no law providing this. We need this, and we need it at federal and the state level, so that government parties cannot win by simply acting like an ATM machine. Because when you have parties that can actually win by acting like ATM machine, why should the opposition do their job and offering better alternative? Because they would not win anyway. And at the outcome, likely some of the opposition would then just go on to talk about ethnicities, religion, language, and so on, because that's the easiest way for them to get support. Now, related to that, we need to make our EC answerable to the parliament, not to the Prime Minister. Likewise, this is part of the important reform to eliminate a two-classes society. So we need to reform our MACC, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. Same way, make it answerable to the parliament and not controlled by the Prime Minister. Now, when we talk about all this, we want them to be controlled, answerable to the parliament. Parliament need to be strengthened. So the 7th reform we need is a Parliamentary Services Act to enable parliament's administrative and financial autonomy, so that they can do things and not depending on the Prime Minister, at the mercy of the Prime Minister. And when we talk about Parliament again, just now, Nurul Izzah talked about private member bills and so on, but we never see a private member bill being tabled. I remember Dr. Jayakumar in the past has tabled a bill, private member bill on Social Inclusion Commission, and never get a chance to be tabled. Even government backbenchers, Azalina, which proposed a bill for recall and never get through. We need to do this. And one of the ways to do this is to make sure the parliament has a longer period to meet. In the past 20 years, the average is 60 days a year. That's too little. This is pre-COVID. We need to increase it to 100 days and maybe 1/6 of the hours to be given to the opposition and the government backbenchers. So not to let parliament become just the arena for the minister to put up a good show. And that's also in a way to make sure that in future, if you change government, you have renewal, generational renewals of minister, you wouldn't end up having minister who never really pick up the skill and the expertise. Now, the 9th point, before we forget, this is actually part of the MOU promise that we should have a 10-year tenure for Prime Minister. Now, you ask, how do we get all these things before election? I have made the case that we need all these things so that when we have elections, no matter what's the outcome, we are ready and we can move forward. We can become country like Germany, New Zealand, Scandinavian country where even you have a minority government, you have a coalition government out of a hung parliament, things are still all right. Now, how do we do this? We need one condition, that the current parliament, and by extension, the government, runs their full terms all the way until 15th of July, 2023. In other words, we need a fixed term parliament. Fixed term parliament means that parliament should run its full course unless in two situations. One is if the government loses the confidence of the parliament, then you must have that options of early dissolution. You must have that option. Second is when for whatever reason, 2/3 of the House or a strong majority of the House agree that say, we need to have fresh elections because for whatever reason, this parliament is no longer representing the public opinion anymore. So then you do so. Otherwise, government should run full term. And this is so important, especially for people at the grassroots level. Why? Imagine that if you're a police officer, you are teachers, you are civil servants that get involved during elections in one way or another, or you are reporters. Can you plan your family holiday? Can you plan even your wedding reception if you're going to get married? You can't, because you wouldn't know when the government decided to say, we have elections, and then all your plans get thrown in the sky. We need to have a more predictable election day. So not only to make ordinary people have a good life, you want to allow businesses to have proper planning and to know what's the political cycle like. And most importantly, we need that certainty for our minister to do their job rather than campaigning throughout the years. So all this thing is possible without even amending the federal constitution, because what we need is to start a new constitutional convention, meaning to start a new way of doing things. And that set example, and in the future, people do it again. Over time, people will say, that's the rule. And then one day, if we want, we can amend the federal constitution. But what we need now is to tell all the parties to say, stick to it. And don't tell us just because that now this is bad for you, think that it's bad time for you to have election and say, I do not want it. But then when the time is right, you say, oh, let's go for election. You cannot choose all the time you like. This is not a gamble. You need to treat your job seriously. If workers sign a 5 years contract, they do not have that freedom to say, well, I want to tear my contract apart and force you to sign. So why should politicians have that freedom? That freedom to exceed your work contract and ask for a new one should only come in the two extraordinary circumstances. Otherwise, get your job done. And this is certainly possible because now you have more than half of the MPs do not want this, including the Prime Minister himself. For their selfish reason, they do not want to have an early election. So when this also serves the national interest, let's push for it. When we have one elections a year later, all the things we talk about would also have 11 months for people to absorb and sink into their mind and influence their decision during election. So with that, I wish that Malaysia in 2022 will not have any elections, and we will have elections only after the parliament stand dissolved on 15th of July 2023, and in the 60 days after that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I guess perhaps we can conclude our session for today. We got like one question to all of the panelists. Looking at all negative and pessimistic talk and writings we see now about the future of Malaysia, what is your outlook for Malaysia? Anyone can start.
I can start first. I think this is great. A lot of people think that Malaysia is very unstable. I don't think so. Why? Because that in the past, while we have dominant government, they like to say that they provided stability, but often they are the one who cause trouble. When they win too big, they started infighting and all the political turmoil came. Right now, when we have a hung parliament, no parties actually have a majority. Everyone have a chance to win, but no one have that confidence that we win. They all become very humble. So what we need to is to make sure that we can divide and rule the politician. Never let them to divide and rule you, but you should divide them and rule them. And as I say, that politicians can be men's and women's best friend, and in the idiomatic sense, but you need to give them good house training. So be a good master to politicians, they will be good servant to you.
Thank you, Prof. Rani or Raj, any of you?
Okay, I'll go next. I'm quite optimistic because as you can see, as time passes by, the more senior or older politicians are slowly getting weeded out by time. And I'm quite hopeful that the younger generation would make better choices when it comes to their leaders. I'm hopeful. Of course, the upcoming election is one of the tests that we are going to see. Only 18 is in place. Younger voters are here. Let's see how they vote. But I think that social media has played a role, to paint a picture that Malaysia is very bleak. Compared to this country, compared to that country, grass is always greener on the other side. That's how it's portrayed. Today I was scrolling through social media. 1 USD is equivalent to 4 ringgit 50 cent. Then the whole discussion, and then the past few months it was Singapore, Singapore dollar. So yeah, I mean, if you pick out minor details like that, definitely you rasa tak puas hati lah. But then I'm quite grateful that Malaysia is peaceful, regardless how bad it seems at times as well. But we still have the reasonable people. Majority of people are actually still reasonable. It's the one on social media making a lot of noise that you think are the majority. But in reality, the reasonable people form the great majority lah. Okay, so I'm quite optimistic. I have a lot of friends at my particular age who are considering moving overseas. All this Australia, US, Hong Kong, Singapore. But you don't really belong there. At the end of the day, I'm still Malaysian. This is where I belong, and I intend to use my skills to make Malaysia a better place. I don't really want to make another country a better place. So yeah, that's my optimistic view lah.
Thank you, Raj. Perhaps before Rani answer that question, I have another question for Rani. What can be done to elevate the profile and good work of PSM so that it will increase its chances in the next GE?
Okay, I think we just need to consistently continue working. And we just hope that people will see that a party like us should be in power, because we are very pro people, pro worker, pro distribution of wealth, and we are, I mean, they are very serious politicians in our group. We have studied a lot of issues, various issues on environment and so on, and we've got policies. You know, we are like an, I mean, we are small, but we are like an alternative. I wouldn't say government, but you know, we are. I think we are very in touch with the pulse of the country, and I think we should be taken more seriously, and people should start giving votes, because a small party can grow. If we have the right policies, people should give their votes and support to us, so that a party with such policies can take over at some time. Yeah, that's promoting ourselves.
Right. On the last question, what is your outlook for Malaysia?
Okay, I'm a hopeful person. Maybe all socialists are. Yeah. So we have a country that's full of resources. I'm very impressed with our population. I think they are very mature. They brought about change. They took the government away from people. I mean, the previous rulers who ruled for so many years, and they gave it to another group, you know. And I think that that showed a lot of maturity, that people could think and could decide how to vote in an election. You know, they took many people by surprise. You know, I don't think politicians were actually prepared for that scenario. So we can't take people for granted, which is good. And I think that what we need is a good driver, good government. But we have to be wary of politics that's divisive, racially and racially divisive. Yeah. Otherwise, I think there is a lot of hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rani. So thank you so much to our speakers for your time. So we really had a great discussion for this webinar. And also I would like to remind to our viewers, we do have previous recording on the topic about People's Agenda that you can find on Aliran's website or Aliran's Facebook page. So that's it. We call it a day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Amirah.
Amirah.
Thank you.
Thanks to
Bye.
Aliran, Suaram, Gerak, Pakos, and Safe Rivers, and Undi. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, bro.